Hey there, crafters and stashers. Welcome to the How long has it been since I've done this? Hey there, crafters and stashers. Welcome to the CraftStash podcast. I'm your host, Kim. Hey guys, it's Tuesday. Woohoo! This is episode 125. I'm calling it All the Rainbows, All the Knits. And if you haven't seen my show before, welcome aboard. It's going to be a lot of fun, I hope. If you've watched Crafty Podcast, it kind of follows the general gist of things. I'm going to talk a little bit of what I'm crafting, a little bit of what I'm stashing, and a little bit of periphery. If you've been around the block before and you know me, welcome back. Thank you so much for sticking around. I know it's been a while since we chatted, but let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Hey guys, I actually did something amazing. Actually not amazing at all. I just wrote down show notes because I realized I was really out of practice. I haven't podcasted since January when I moved to Denver. I used to live in New York City, but now I'm in Denver, Colorado, enjoying the mile high life. And having said that, I was really fuzzy. So look, proof positive. I actually wrote down show notes. I actually got a couple more things set up in terms of like podcasting, so we'll see if you guys notice a difference in quality of sound and visuals. Let me know what you think. But yeah, we're supposed to be talking about knitting and stuff, right? So let's just jump right into it. So first up, I wanted to talk about a finished object that I have. I'm wearing it right now. It's the Ripken cowl. The pattern is by Hannah Berg. It's available on Ravelry, as is most knitting patterns these days. And it's a lovely cowl just made out of Madeline Tosh. Gosh, what was it? What's the base? This is why it's good to have things written down. This is made out of, I didn't write it down, Madeline Tosh Light, Tosh Merino Light, which is a single stranded yarn. And you can see that there's several different colors. Now the original pattern calls for working this in two main colors, one dominant color and then stripes of another color. I decided to make this in big strips. Basically, the story behind this yarn is that this is my interview scarf. I bought this yarn when I was visiting Denver in November for my interview for where I work now. And wherever I go, I feel like I can't not buy Madeline Tosh. It's really bad. I always go into a yarn store looking for, what's the local dyed yarn by you guys in your neighborhood or in your area? And then I always walk out with Madeline Tosh. It's a really bad habit. But anyway, this lovely color, the black and white color, the newsprint that you see is called Optic. And I went ahead and picked up a couple of, Madeline Tosh does this fun thing. It's mini skeins and she calls them unicorn tails. So I got 4 different unicorn tails in 4 different colors and basically just knitted them all up into the cowl. The really good thing about this cowl, it's about, 12 to 14 inches wide. When I first knit it, it was very narrow and I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't like the way it fit, but I blocked the heck out of it and it fits just perfectly now, and it can wrap around 2 times and hang just the way that I like cowls to hang without being too tight or too loose. So that's my finished object. Woohoo! Not many pattern modifications outside of not following the striping pattern, and I also did it in garter stitch. I'm learning to love garter stitch. I used to totally hate it, but it's nicer because I don't have to worry about it rolling in on itself at all. So what else have I got for you? I've actually got another finished object. Small secret, this is my 3rd time recording this episode. The first time I brought my camera but didn't bring a tripod, so I had Greg, my husband, hold the camera for me while we were recording outside in a park, and that just didn't work out. It was a little bit too shaky. The second time I recorded, I was home, had my tripod, but I had the file size up way huge. So my computer told me that it was going to take 24 hours for me to download the images and video from my camera to my computer, which was not happening. So 3rd time's the charm, I hope. So in that time, I finished a project that I had been just talking about in the other 2 takes. These are a pair of really fun socks. The sock pattern is basically a generic toe-up sock pattern that I always do. I tend to do my socks one at a time, toe-up, with an afterthought heel. But this month, actually back in March, Stacy from the Mustache podcast was holding what she calls Socks Ed, which is socks education. She was basically having 3 different designers teach how to do a specific sock heel method. So I did an audit of that socks education because I didn't have any mustache yarn to knit with. Whoops. But it was really fun because I learned 2 different heels. What I did was I knit 1 heel for each sock. So the first sock, let me see if I remember correctly. Okay, so forgive because these have been worn. I ended up giving them to Greg. They were slightly too big for me, but I had to make them to the pattern size, and I didn't really worry about fitting, and that's why they didn't end up fitting me. If I'd paid more attention, they would totally fit me. But the first sock heel that I did was the double gusset, and I don't know if you guys can see very subtly these kind of little vertical lines and vertical shifts in the stripes. That's the double gusset in this heel. And what that double gusset does is it hugs the heel of your foot a little bit more tightly under the ball of your foot or under the heel of your foot, so that it gives a little bit more snug feeling. And the reason I really liked it is because since I do afterthought heels so often, I'm really used to socks having the issue where there's a big gap where you join that afterthought heel. This method totally eliminates that, plus it has a nice tighter fit on the bottom. So when I tried these on, granted they were a little bit too big for me, but they felt like they were going to fit really nicely, so that's really good. The other sock heel that I did, sorry, and let me tell you who that double gusset is by. The double gusset pattern is originally by Christy Payne, but I used Carrie Ramirez's modification where you do it toe up. So thank you so much, Carrie Ramirez, because I do not like knitting socks cuff down, because yeah, I'd rather just go bottom up and just keep on going. As a matter of fact, I thought these were going to be way taller because I had so much yarn left, but I started getting tired of knitting them. So anywho, as my mother likes to say, the second sock heel that I did was Megan Williams's OMG heel, which stands for, the OMG stands for one needle mock gusset. And the cool thing about that is that it's kind of like it has wrapless wraps, and you can kind of keep everything on 1 needle, and it preserves your self-striping pattern. Again, you can notice that my gap is not as big as it might have been if I had done an afterthought heel. I found this one a little bit trickier to do, simply because I always lose my place with short rows, and even though it's a wrapless short row, it's still a short row. But then again, I did do this one first before I did the double gusset, and I felt like that probably made me like the double gusset more because it was my second time doing wraps. The yarn is this really, really lovely self-striping yarn. It's maybe 10, 12 colors, and the color is called Patchwork, and it's by QR. I don't know how to say their Etsy store name. It's Quare, I believe. And they sell really fun self-striping. So yay for finished objects all over the place. The other finished object that I have that I won't show you in person, but I will toss a picture up, is I made a skirt, y'all. I've been trying to be crafty in other ways other than knitting and crocheting while I've been in Denver. I crocheted a baby blanket, been knitting the stuff that I showed you, and I also made a skirt for myself. Fancy Tiger, which is kind of the Pearl Soho of the West, is a really great store in town in Denver. They've got knitting things, crocheting things, spinning things, and sewing things, and a couple of embroidery things. So I took a skirt class with them. I think it was called the Everyday Skirt. It's a pattern by Liesl and Company, and it's a really fun A-line skirt with no zippers, no buttons, and the best part of all, it has pockets. So it was a pretty easy class and a pretty easy pattern, considering that I'm a horrible sewer and I actually don't really like sewing. I figured out I like quilting but not garment sewing. And the skirt fits me really nicely. The only note that I would say is if you're going to make this pattern, it runs a little bit big. I'm a pretty curvy girl. I usually wear like a size 12 to size 14 depending on the day, but I have a tiny waist. So because my waist is small, I think my waist is like a 32-inch waist and with like a 46-inch hip or something crazy like that. But the medium fit me just fine because it really is just cinching around the waist. So just heads up to really double check your measurements if you're going to make that skirt, but it's really fun. So I think that's all that no, that is not all that I'm crafting. I have cast on for 2 more projects. So exciting. The first one is using, of course, Madeline Tosh yarn. Slide off camera here and grab it for you. And it is a sweater that I'm going to freeform design the pattern for. Basically, I kind of I've been knitting so long that I know like generally when I can fudge things, and I've made a couple sweaters before, so I'm basically gonna just do a top-down raglan sweater and throw a couple of textures in there. I was really inspired by the Susu pattern, which is by Nara Gone. It's a really fun asymmetrical sweater pattern that has a central cable and then heavy textures on both sides, and it's got this weird little like asymmetrical hem on both sides, and it's like a really big, roomy, romantic sweater. I like the look of it, but I know that with my hips, those weird little divots on the side is not gonna look cool. So I'm basically designing a sweater based on that, and I will bring out my handy dandy project book to show you guys the plan if I could find it. So I like keeping things in this project book because it helps me kind of plan out schematics and diagrams of stuff, and also keep track of supplies. So this is part of the schematic for the blanket that the huppah that I made for my sister last year, that big crazy huppah where I kind of designed the thing inside and out, and it just helped me keep track of the stitch patterns and the counts and all that stuff. So I'm keeping all of that stuff for just for reference if I ever want to make a crazy big huppah using 3,000 yards of yarn. I'm blocking it out to 8 foot square. But for this, it's basically just, this is my funky little schematic where I kind of am jotting down my notes. And because I know better, I'm blocking the yarn. So I'm using Madeline Tosh DK, like I said, in this really, really, really fun colorway. Have you guys seen all of the splatter dyed yarns hanging out lately? I feel like everything, well, not everything, every major indie dyer and a few of the bigger ones are doing fun color splattered yarns. So this is my gauge swatch. Uh-oh, camera, you're not being nice. I did it in the round just because I plan to make the sweater in the round, and it's going up pretty nicely, so I think I can get started with my sweater sometime soon. The other big project that I'm planning is, I already have one of these on the needles. It's one of those lovely mitered square blankets that use up tons of scrap yarn. If you're on Instagram, you've definitely seen them around lately because all the cool kids are doing them. I was doing it before it was cool. No, just totally kidding. I was doing it when everyone else was doing it. But that version is really just scrap yarn, so it wasn't really motivating to me to kind of get through it. I still have it on the needles, and I'll probably finish it when I'm in my 50s. But considering I'm in my 30s, I should probably get started on something else. So one second while I reach over. So I have purchased from Ladybug Yarns before. They make really fun self-striping sock yarn. And I was in the market, I was actually contemplating buying a full suite of Madeline Tosh unicorn tails, the ones that I just showed you in this cowl. That would have been like $150, and it would have been a single ply yarn, and the colors would have been gorgeous, but I was kind of worried about making something big and substantial out of a single ply yarn. So I went looking for an indie dyer that had small mini skeins and fun different colors. And of course I stumbled back onto Ladybug Fibers, and I worked at a deal. Well, it wasn't a deal. She totally gave me the regular price. Don't think that I got something that you couldn't get. But let me see something real quick. I'm just looking through my notes. So Meg was able to dye me up. She has 22 colors of these little, she basically says that they're good to use for sock heels and toes together to coordinate with self-striping yarn. She sells them as one-offs. So I bought a whole bakery box of little sock yarn mini skeins, and they're about 115 yards each. So I am planning an epic rainbow mitered square blanket using these lovely things. So today I went ahead and knit up 2 little mitered square swatches, because basically I want to do a rainbow, but I want to do it in a really fun pattern. Sorry, that's so blown out. But this is about the size that the mitered squares are going to be. I basically cast on 35 stitches because that's how old I'm going to be this year. So it'd be cool if I cast on 35 stitches and see how many years it takes me. Maybe I'll be 40 when I finish this blanket. But yeah, I'm basically going to figure out how many of these mitered squares each of the little balls is going to give me, and then I will plan out with Excel just a color grid of what I want to do with this bad boy. So if you've never done this kind of thing before in terms of estimating how much yarn you have and how much yarn a project will use, it's really pretty simple. You're basically taking, and I should have done this before, I should have weighed the entire little ball before I knit the little swatch. but the swatch itself is still attached. It's kind of tangled, but let me show you. So what I should have done is measured all of this together, and then when I finish knitting this, measure this by itself, measure this by itself, and that'll tell me, hey, this is only half an ounce or a quarter of an ounce, and this is 10 ounces, or no, it's not 10 ounces. This is only like 3 ounces, so that'll tell me how many of those quarter of an ounce will fit in here, and this way I can kind of figure out, oh, each one of these is going to give me 20, given the size, I'm guesstimating 20 squares, and then this way I can kind of plot out, well, if I've got 22 colors and each of them makes 22 squares, I can start plotting in Excel, and when I run out of a given color, when I see 22 squares in my schematic, I'll know, okay, well, that design won't work, or it will work, or I'll move things around. So that's my basic plan. Wish me luck, and wish me patience, because it's going to take a while. I knit 2 of those squares while in a meeting at work. Yay for jobs where you can knit at work. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And it took me maybe 45 minutes to knit each one, which sounds kind of long, but that's totally fine for me, because then I could do the crazy math of like, oh, it takes me 45 minutes to knit each square, and I get 20 squares per ball, and there's 22 balls, so that's going to be 3 weeks of my life of knitting, which is kind of what we do, which is kind of awesome. So I'm excited about that. So that's a lot of what I'm crafting, I think. Let's talk about what I'm stashing. So for what I'm stashing, I wanted to share with you the Ladybug Fiber Company yarn that I just showed you for the rainbow blanket. And let's see what else we had with what I'm stashing. Yes. So for what I'm stashing, I wanted to share with you, Ravelry is still kind of awesome. I'm not actually on there very often anymore, just because I'm such a huge fan of Instagram. It's shorter, it's way more visual, and people share just as much information about their projects if you follow the right people, so I've been on there way more. But I do check in on Ravelry every once in a while, and I cleared out my message box a couple of days ago, and I ran into Angela, who is I Am a Yarnaholic, and she was really, really sweet, and she asked me a basic question. She said, hey, do you have any suggestions for a beautiful but simple or easy shawl pattern? And I basically ended up replying to her, hey, the concept of simple in knitting is a little bit relative. So I kind of just shared with her the projects that I had favorited on Ravelry that were shawls. I just kind of did all the filters and shared that with her. But I figured that I would share that information with you too, because Ravelry is so awesome. But, now that it's 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, I almost forget about how powerful it is. So I just wanted to share what I'm stashing in terms of shawl projects with you from Angela's question. So the 3 shawls that I recommended to her were the Elk Tooth shawl by Caitlin French. I had added this maybe 4 years ago. It's a really lovely, kind of very sturdy looking shawl with a lovely and subtle, like chunky lace is what I like to call it, like lace with smaller holes in the middle and not super airy lace. And she knits it up in what looks like a worsted or a DK weight yarn, and that's a free pattern that I kind of thought was a fun one. The other shawls that I really liked were the Lala's Simple shawl, which I have queued. It's been queued pretty much since the pattern was released, and I've made a couple that are very similar to it, but it's such a simple shawl. Duh, that's why it's called Lala's Simple shawl. That I felt like I should re-recommend that, because as more and more patterns are published, it's easy to forget the good ones that already exist. Lala's Simple shawl. If you don't know who Lala is, that's Laura Linneman of the Knit Girls podcast. And the last shawl that I shared with Angela was the Northern Lights shawl, which is a pattern by Annie M. It's a really fun chevron half pie shawl, which is kind of interesting because it's chevrons, but it happens to move in a half circular pattern, and it's fairly simple, and it's also free. So if you like any of those, there you go. And I think that's all that I have for stashing. So periphery. Yay. So for periphery, I just wanted to share kind of how I'm doing and all that good stuff, because the thing that is cool about podcasters is that there's so many of them, but that means that a distinguishing factor is really the projects that we're making, obviously, but like who we are. And I kind of think it's nice to kind of include that at the end for those of you guys who are sometimes like me, like you're just like, show me the knits. And sometimes it's also nice to hear how people are doing too. So Denver is awesome. It's treating us really, really well. We've moved in, I think, on the 29th of December, and it's so nice. People are really sweet, people are really open, people are really down to earth, And it's kind of like we've moved into a little Brooklyn, a little Lower East Side. Like there's so many hipsters. Everyone has a beard, so much so that Greg shaved off his beard when he moved here because there were just too many dudes with beards. There's great craft beer, and there's a budding art and crafts community, and I'm really glad to be a part of it. We've been kind of taking our time every weekend exploring. You know, we went hiking a couple of weeks ago. We went up to Dinosaur Ridge, which is where I found out that my fear of heights is still alive and kicking. I really wanted to do what's called a 14er here. It's basically climbing a mountain that is over 14,000 feet. And I said, hey, I like hiking. I can totally do that. But if any of those mountains include Razorback Cliffs, which the majority of them do, I'm going to be in trouble. So for now, I think my hiking is going to be relegated to any of the forest and kind of like little natural park areas in Colorado. We've been biking a lot, which is really nice. We made our own craft beer a couple of weeks ago. And hopefully I will start to do more interesting things with the podcast. I got this cool setup where I've got lights and a really nice lens. I've got a new microphone. So hopefully you will see me out and about in the near future. Don't be surprised if it's another month or so before I podcast again. I really appreciate you guys hopping by every now and then. But in the meantime, you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Craoli. Or you can find me online. I'm at Craoli.com. Other than that, you know what I'm going to tell you if you've seen me before. If you can't craft it, stash it. Cheers.